You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 5.
Inside the taxi, Burnmaster was sitting in the front passenger seat and Isabelle, Laheeti, Twigger and Gulbenkian were crammed into the rear seat. It was uncomfortably crowded back there, but Burnmaster assured them the hotel was only a short drive from the airport, so they wouldn't have to sit in each other's laps for very long. Thankfully, all of their baggage fitted in the trunk of the car, so they weren't slugged with all the bags as well. Isabelle stared out the window in fascination. She had never in her sheltered life seen anything like the streets of Nepal. The roads were choked with old cars, trucks belching smoke, and hordes of human traffic on motorbikes. The river of vehicles flowed slowly through the streets and occasionally peeled off into adjoining roads or narrow lanes. Whole families balancing precariously on little motorized scooters drifted past Isabelle's window, the mother and father wearing plastic baseball caps for helmets and the kids grinning in the breeze. The large trucks had little regard for the other vehicles, and on several occasions the taxi suddenly swerved to avoid a collision. There were no posted speed limits, but it didn't matter because the traffic was so heavy that the taxi couldn't travel faster than about 40 kilometers per hour. After they sailed through the second set of red traffic lights, Isabelle realized that road rules were optional. Her fingers vainly searched for a seatbelt between the cushions of the rear seat, but if the car was fitted with one, Gulbenkian was probably sitting on it. It had been several years since Burnmaster had visited Kathmandu, and he couldn't clearly remember how to get to the hotel. However, he was fairly sure it wasn't the way they were going. The taxi driver was a small man who drove with one hand on the steering wheel, one hand on the horn, and both feet on the accelerator. "Are you sure this is the right way to the hotel?" asked Burnmaster. The taxi driver's eyes flicked across briefly. Yes, right way to hotel," he replied. "I know way." If there was anything suspicious about the taxi driver's body language, Burnmaster failed to notice. It had been a long flight from Vavu, and he was looking forward to checking into the hotel and getting a good night's sleep. So as the taxi wound its way through the crowded streets of Kathmandu, taking detours, cutting through dark laneways, traveling deeper into the old city, Burnmaster put aside his doubts and ignored the little voice in the back of his head that was telling him something wasn't quite right. Despite the fact that he was too young to legally drive a car, Pemba had been behind the wheel since he was 12 years old and had no trouble driving through the heavy traffic in Kathmandu Valley and staying on the tail of the taxi carrying Burnmaster and his companions. There was no need for Zaw to offer his commentary on their progress, but that didn't stop the rambunctious Yeti from positioning himself in the gap between the two front seats and barking instructions at Pemba. "You're losing them," Zaw exclaimed. "They're too far ahead. You should speed up and pass this truck in front of us." Pemba adjusted the rear-view mirror so that he had a clear view out of the back window, unobstructed by Zaw's hooded head. "I'm not losing them," he retorted. "I'm staying a safe distance back. I don't want to tip them off that we're following them." "Who are they, spies?" Zaw scoffed. "They're not going to look back. They're too busy looking out the windows. But if they get much further ahead, even I won't be able to see them." Abby shook her head within the shadows of her hood. "Would you just sit back and let Pemba drive?" she complained. "He knows more about it than you do." "That's only because he never lets me drive," Zaw grumbled. "It doesn't look so hard. When you get your license, you can drive," said Pemba. "You don't have a license," Zaw howled indignantly. "Yes, I have," Pemba replied, then added, "Well, a fake one, anyway." "Exactly," muttered Zaw. They drove for a while in silence, following the taxi at a safe distance. Pemba tried to keep one car between his car and the taxi, but as they wound their way through the dark streets, the traffic thinned out and he had to drop back even further to avoid detection. Soon the roads became narrower, darker, and the only other vehicles they saw were the occasional motorcycle being ridden by young men with hard, unfriendly expressions on their faces. The street lamps petered out until the only light came from the sliver of moon high in the night sky. This side of Kathmandu Valley was gloomy and forbidding. The shop fronts lining the streets were all heavily fortified with black iron bars, and the footpaths were deserted. This was gangland. Abby ran her eyes up and down the street with a look of concern on her furry features. Guys," she began, "have you noticed that we're traveling into the bad side of the valley?" "Yeah, I was thinking that myself," replied Pemba. "There aren't any hotels round here. I wonder why Burnmaster is going this way." "Maybe he knows someone here and he's staying at their house for the night," Abby suggested. "Mustn't be a very nice someone," Zaw muttered. Up ahead, the taxi turned left and disappeared into an alleyway. Pemba sped up a little and swung the car around the corner. Abby glanced down at the garbage that clogged the rainwater gutters at the edge of the road. Then she looked up at the apartment windows flashing past. There were no lights and the curtains were tightly drawn. It was just the taxi, the car, and a maze of black laneways. Pemba switched off his headlights in an effort to blend into the darkness. Now the brightest objects in the car were the yeti's blue eyes. He drove more slowly. "Did you ever hear those stories about thieves who impersonate taxi drivers?" Zaw said quietly. "They pick people up and drive them somewhere and rob them at knife point." Pemba knew the stories, but they let their victims go, don't they? He asked. Zaw shrugged and said, "Sometimes." The red brake lights of the taxi shone dimly as the vehicle slowed to a halt in the middle of the deserted alleyway. 100 meters back, Pemba stopped the car and waited to see what would happen. He peered through the gloom, but the yeti's eyes were sharper than his. Abby was the first to see one of the taxi's occupants jump out of the vehicle and run off into the night. Then she saw the shadows detach themselves from the darkness and surround the taxi. "I think we have a problem," she said. No sooner had the taxi stopped than the driver flung open his door and disappeared into the darkness, clutching the car keys in one tightly clenched fist. Everybody stared at the open door in shock, and the taxi was completely silent for a long moment, save for the creaking noise from the hinges as the car door swung slowly closed. Gulbenkian was the first to recover from the surprise. He was new to Nepal, but he knew a dangerous situation when he saw one. "I think it would be a good idea to leave this place immediately," he said to Burnmaster. It was as much of a shock to hear Gulbenkian speak without stammering as it was to see their driver take off into the night. Isabelle had, only once or twice in her life, heard the giant islander speak without stuttering, and she knew exactly what it meant. When he speaks without stuttering, that's when he's dangerous. Burnmaster leaned across the driver's seat and checked the ignition. "He took the keys, so we can't drive," he stated. "I might be able to hot-wire it." That sounded like a great idea, but then Twigger saw several forms materialize from the gloom and surround the taxi. As they came closer, he saw that they were men with thin, muscular physiques and hungry eyes. 2 were carrying lengths of wood and 2 more were holding large knives. "I think we've got company," he whispered, pointing to either side of the car. "Lock the doors so they can't get in," he hissed. Burnmaster pressed the latch down on his door in the front, but immediately realized the mechanism was broken, probably deliberately. In the back, Twigger and Isabelle tried their latches without success. "Mine's not working," Isabelle whispered. "Maybe we can hold the doors shut," said Burnmaster. His voice didn't sound very hopeful. Then he noticed that Isabelle's window was all the way down, and he exclaimed, "Isabelle, wind your window up." Just then, one of the men appeared beside Isabelle's door and slowly curled his bony fingers around the edge of the open window. Somehow the trespass of those fingertips into the interior of the taxi made the danger of the situation suddenly very real to Isabelle. She stared at the man's dirty fingernails fearfully and wondered what Burnmaster and Gulbenkian would do. For some reason, Twigger looked at the man's clothes. They were unwashed but in good condition. They looked like brand-name items. He didn't look that poor. He didn't look like he needed to rob people to survive, but then they never do. The man lowered his grinning face to the open window. "Welcome to Kathmandu Valley," he sneered. Abby said, "I'm really starting to think we've got a problem." Zaw was leaning forwards intently and staring with a terrible fascination at the events unfolding in the distance. "Geez, I hate being right all the time," he replied. "You're not right all the time," Pemba corrected. "Well, I was right about this," declared Zaw. Abby pushed the hood of her jacket off her head and looked from Pemba to her brother. "Who cares who was right?" she said. "What the heck are we going to do now?" "Seems pretty straightforward to me," Zaw said, and rested his arms comfortably on his thighs. He looked relaxed. His bulk was covered up by the jeans and jacket, but underneath he was all muscle and bone. "And fur," his sister waited for him to elaborate, but when he didn't, she said, "Well, our job is to make sure that Burnmaster and his companions, whoever they are, have a safe time in Nepal, find absolutely no evidence that yetis exist, and leave empty-handed," he replied. "That means there's really only one thing for us to do right now." Like her brother, Abby was built for violence, but unlike her brother, she wasn't keen on it. "And that is?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Kick some butt," Zaw said with a grin. Pemba started to get out of the car, but Zaw placed a hand on the human boy's shoulder. "You stay here," he ordered. "Hey, I can handle myself," Pemba replied. "Behind the steering wheel you can," said Zaw, "but I think me and Abby should take care of this." Pemba looked at the taxi, then back at his friend. "But they've probably got knives," he said. Zaw extended the razor-sharp claws of one hand. "So have we," he replied somberly. Just do exactly what they say, Burnmaster said to everybody in the taxi. His hands were slightly raised so that the thieves could see that he wasn't concealing a weapon. That's right, the man at the window said, keeping a wary eye on the giant islander man sitting in the back of the taxi. Apparently he spoke enough English to threaten his victims. You do as I say, you not get hurt. Their taxi driver had returned and opened the trunk of the taxi containing all of their luggage. Two of the thieves began unloading the bags and tossing them to the side of the road. The man at the window looked over at the loot. This is good, he said. The bags look expensive. Then he caught the taxi driver's attention and said in his own language, "What were you thinking, robbing this group? Did you see the size of the guy in the back of this taxi? He's the biggest darn man I've ever seen in my life." The taxi driver paused, wiped his sleeve across his sweaty forehead and replied, "They looked cashed up. Besides, what can go wrong? There's 5 of us and 1 of him. Just make sure he stays in the taxi." The man at the window spat on the ground angrily and returned his attention to the occupants of the taxi. He rested the knife in his right hand on the edge of the open window. Isabelle's eyes grew wide at the sight of the silver blade only inches from her face. "Now, what is in your pockets, eh?" the man asked. "Give me your wallet, your credit cards, everything." Then his voice turned hard and he said, "If you hide something, I will hurt you." Burnmaster was the first to volunteer his leather wallet. "That's it, that's the lot from me," he said calmly. "There's money in there and credit cards." He placed the wallet in the man's waiting hand. "Good," the man grunted, immediately passing it to one of the other thieves moving around outside the car. He turned his gaze to Gulbenkian. "And you," he said. The big man shook his head, and there was an unnatural calm in his deep voice when he replied, "All of my money is in my bag in the back." The knife hovered near the open window while the man considered this answer. Isabelle couldn't be certain, but it looked like the man was weighing up whether to challenge Gulbenkian about his reply. Apparently he decided it wasn't worth it, but then made the possibly fatal mistake of fixing his attention on the young Prince of Vavu. "What about you, boy?" he asked. Then he frowned and added, "You look familiar. I see your face before somewhere. Maybe you are famous." "No, I don't have anything," Laheeti said, his eyes moving from the knife to the face at the open window. The man glared into the taxi. "Don't lie to me, boy," he hissed, "or I will cut you very badly." He extended his knife arm into the taxi with the point of the blade leading the way. It was the opportunity Gulbenkian had been waiting for. Seizing the thin wrist with one massive hand, he wrenched the whole arm inside the taxi and wound the window up quickly, pinning the arm between the top of the window and the door. The man howled in pain and tried to pull his arm out, but Gulbenkian's iron grip was far too strong. Laheeti and Twig went to work prizing the bony fingers off the knife handle. There was a terrific pounding on the roof of the taxi as the man thumped his free hand down in anger. "You let go of my arm," he howled. "You let go now, or when I open this door I will make you pay." Gulbenkian's normally beatific expression had twisted into a mask of rage. "You want this door open," he bellowed. "Then allow me to help you with that." Grabbing the headrest of the front seat to brace himself, he raised one enormous foot in the air and took aim at the door. Isabelle squeezed her eyes shut and flattened herself against the seat, knowing that something really bad was about to happen. When Laheeti's life was in danger, Gulbenkian became an unstoppable force of nature, and the thief on the other side of that car door was about to find that out the hard way. When the thief stared through the window at the sole of Gull's size 20 shoe, the color drained from his face, and he realized that he was about to get hit with a battering ram. With a howl of rage, the giant islander extended his leg with one swift motion. The steel frame buckled, the hinges blew apart, and the door was blasted from the car along with the hapless thief. Clinging grimly to the shattered door, the thief flew through the air, struck a brick wall at the edge of the alleyway, and crumpled to the footpath in a heap. The other thieves around the taxi froze and stared at their unconscious companion. Tourists fresh off the plane were supposed to be sitting ducks, but this robbery wasn't going according to plan. But their concern at this turn of events was quickly replaced with rage that these foreigners dared to challenge their authority. After all, this was their territory, they had the weapons and they would rob whomever they pleased. A brief exchange of glances in the darkness confirmed their course of action. Each man advanced on the taxi and gripped his weapon more tightly with the intention of teaching these tourists a lesson they would never forget. Burnmaster flung open the glove compartment, looking for anything he could use as a weapon. Pens, paper, chewing gum, and empty chocolate wrappers, then his fingers touched a cold steel object. Withdrawing his hand, he saw that he held a long metal torch. For some reason, he tried the switch. It didn't work, but it didn't matter. At least he wasn't going into the fight empty-handed. He spun around in the seat to face Isabelle, Laheeti, and Twigger. "Whatever happens, you three stay in the car, got it?" he ordered in a stern voice. They nodded fearfully. Burnmaster nodded to Gulbenkian and they got out of the car to face the attackers. The thieves split up, the two armed with lengths of wood moving towards the South African and the other two armed with knives circling the giant islander. In the moments that followed, Burnmaster sized up his attackers. He was taller than they were and stronger. In a one-on-one fight he would be confident of winning, but against two of them he was in trouble. His steel torch would make a good hitting weapon, but it was no match against those wooden planks that the thieves hefted like baseball bats. Any further thoughts were cut short by a rapid movement to his left. One man lunged forward and swung his wood at Burnmaster. He ducked under the blow and the wood bashed against the roof of the taxi. The second man speared his plank at Burnmaster's head, but the South African sidestepped the hit and drove the end of the steel torch into the man's ribs. Gasping in surprise, the man backed away, but before Burnmaster could capitalize on the moment, the other man brought his wood down hard against Burnmaster's back. Burnmaster faltered, went down on one knee, and the attacker slipped his length of wood under Burnmaster's chin and pulled back viciously, crushing his windpipe. Dropping the torch, Burnmaster's fingers scrabbled desperately at the wood, squashing his neck, but his attacker was too strong. With a baleful look in his dark eyes, the man forced Burnmaster down on both knees while the other thief readied himself to deliver a fatal blow to the head. On the other side of the car, Gulbenkian had his own problems. The thieves who set their sights on the giant islander were determined to make his trip to Nepal memorable for all of the wrong reasons. Their knife arms were thin but dangerously fast. In the moments after he got out of the car, Gulbenkian had managed to evade those blades through lightning-fast reflexes and luck. But the two thieves were circling him like hungry wolves, and it was just a matter of time before one of them drew first blood. Gulbenkian knew that if he could get his hands on one of them, it would be lights out for that man, but he ran the risk of ending up with the other thief's knife in his back. What he needed was an opportunity to grab both men at the same time and knock their heads together. But with one of them always just out of reach, Gulbenkian started to wonder if he was fighting a losing battle. Then he looked over, saw that Burnmaster was in the strangulating grip of one of the thieves, and felt a terrible anger that one taxi ride had ended up going so horribly wrong. On the other side of the car, the thief that Burnmaster had struck now stood over the kneeling South African, gloating. Holding the wood like a golf club, he casually lined up Burnmaster's head like a golfer preparing to take his shot. Through bloodshot eyes, Burnmaster strained to look up at his attacker. Unable to speak or breathe, all he could do was wait for the inevitable blow. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wished he could apologize to the kids for letting them down. He never finished the thought. Suddenly, from high above, an object rocketed towards the ground like a flaming red cannonball falling from the sky. It landed like a panther just behind the taxi, and for a fleeting second, Burnmaster saw a red jacket and a huge pair of electric blue eyes blaze through the darkness. A heartbeat later, the red jacket was behind Burnmaster's attackers, and in a blur of motion, one man was lifted high in the air and flung across the roof of the taxi. He sailed off the other side of the vehicle and collided with one of Gulbenkian's attackers, sending both of them sprawling to the ground. The thief holding Burnmaster on the ground released his victim and turned to face this new threat. Gripping the length of wood more tightly, he swung at the red jacket with all of his might, but the wood was slashed into pieces by an unseen blade. Then the wooden stub was ripped from his grasp and lofted into the darkness. The last thing he remembered was a feeling of helplessness as he was lifted off the ground and thrown towards his unconscious companions. One thief was still standing. It was the taxi driver who had brought them to that alleyway in the first place. Looking around in a daze, he was unable to understand his rapid change in fortunes. 1 second he had been fleecing these tourists, and the next his friends were lying unconscious in the alleyway. The shock was momentary, and then self-preservation kicked in. He turned and ran down the street as fast as his legs would carry him. In his trouser pocket, the car keys jangled as he disappeared into the night. Zaw, from a standing start, leapt onto the taxi bonnet and then high into the air, covering 10 meters in the blink of an eye. Looking through the vehicle's windscreen, Isabelle caught a glimpse of a white furry foot with several long claws protruding from a pair of blue jeans. But the image seemed nonsensical, and she presumed it was a trick of the moonlight. Burnmaster watched the red jacket sail so high that it passed by the windows of the apartments on the second story. "No way," he murmured to himself. "Nobody can jump that far." Zaw had timed his leap perfectly and he landed squarely on the back of the fleeing taxi driver. The man was flattened against the concrete, and when he later regained consciousness, the tear marks running down the back of his shirt would leave him in no doubt that he had been attacked by an animal and not a man. Zaw ferreted through the thief's pockets, found the keys to the taxi, and threw them over to Abby, who was standing silently in the shadows. She caught them and then tossed them gently into the taxi, where they landed in Isabelle's lap. Gulbenkian heard the jingle of the keys and looked inside the taxi to see Isabelle holding them up. When he turned back to the shadows, the stranger was gone. Burnmaster stared into the distance, but there was no sign of the red jacket. He moved around the taxi to Gulbenkian. "I don't know what just happened, but let's get the heck out of here," he said, still out of breath after the ordeal. Gulbenkian nodded. With Isabelle, Laheeti, and Twigger pleading with them to hurry up, the two men reloaded the luggage in the trunk and slammed it shut. As Burnmaster jumped into the driver's seat, he glanced at a piece of wood on the road and wondered at the parallel, ragged slash marks across it. But his principal concern was to get Isabelle, Laheeti, and Twigger to safety, so he gunned the engine and roared away from the alley, sure now that he could find the hotel and looking for the brightest, safest street to take them there.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.